Hello everyone and welcome back. This is lesson 2 of Systems Thinking and Social Change, and it's great to have you back. I hope you found the first lesson useful and insightful. We are going to dive into the practical application of systems thinking, and in particular, on the next slide, we're going to focus on understanding complexity and using it to solve problems. So our core focus will be to understand when a situation is complex versus when it is not complex, and therefore apply systems thinking. Systems thinking isn't needed when a situation can be solved using conventional thinking. And conventional thinking is when you know and understand the people you're in relationship with, when you've used a previously held solution and it works, and your situations are similar. Your circumstances haven't changed dramatically. So 90% of people in organizations that are dealing with issues or in systems can use conventional thinking to solve their problems by breaking down the problem into parts and fixing what you can control. Systems thinking is best applied when a situation is complex, and so we're going to break down what complex actually means. So that brings us to our objectives for this lesson, and it's twofold. Firstly, to use systems thinking to support strategy in a complex environment. So we're going to look at this notion of strategy differently in a complex environment, and to introduce the social lab method, which is a process of applying systems thinking in a complex situation. So just a quick recap of the first lesson so that we have the building blocks in place. We covered the nature of systems thinking in the first lesson. We looked at how systems work, and covered some concepts. So just a reminder of some of those concepts. We looked at various dimensions of the definition of systems thinking. So just to remind you, systems thinking implies that systems are made up. They are defined by us in order to understand and to influence, or in order to understand and change. And the second concept that I wanted to introduce again is this difference between conceptual and physical reality. The physical reality of a system is what we see, and the conceptual reality of a system is what we think about what we see. And that the trick about systems thinking is that different people in the system see it differently because of the paradigm. So that's why we use that image of the elephant, that you actually have to be speaking to each other across the system to fully understand it and understand why you see the system as you do. And there was a concept about leverage, and really systems change happens when you find the leverage, that the actions have a much bigger impact than the lever that you exercise. And finally we looked at paradigm, and actually paradigm is one of the biggest leverages in a system. If you can change paradigm, you can change a system most effectively. So let me just give you a small example and a big example. I'm a parent of teenagers now, and when they were growing up, I try to apply parenting principles to my second child that worked for my first child. And those of you that know, that have been through bringing up small kids, it's quite a paradigm shock when your parenting principles don't work. And you've got to really think about, what is the foundation for creating a happy child. And I had to change my paradigm for my second child. And it was a hard lesson, because I bumped up against my initial paradigm of parenting and realized it wasn't working. And then a bigger issue is the age we're living in at the moment, where I certainly had a paradigm that teaching happens more effectively in the classroom, and that you need to bring people together face to face to solve their problems. And I have learned in the last few months that that is an old paradigm. And actually, you can make a lot of progress with virtual learning or with virtual collaboration. So those are two examples of changing paradigm as a recap. So I'm introducing another definition here, which there are many definitions of systems thinking out there. I'm pulling out the ones that are most useful for our work on this course. So a working definition of systems is that it's a current pattern of relationships, interactions, and resources. It's the whole of this dynamic interaction that happens that defines a system. And it's not easy to understand a complex system, so we're going to go through a process to help you. Another, I'm not sure if this is a definition or just an observation of systems, but it's a very accurate one. A system is perfectly designed to get you the results it produces. And this is a difficult pill to swallow, because we keep on, Einstein's definition of insanity. We keep trying to do the same things over and over, hoping for a different result. And that is a really good connection to this observation that systems are perfectly designed to get the results they're producing, even if those results aren't what you like or want. So it's really about understanding what those interactions are in a system that create the results it's producing. So this slide is an important slide as a foundation for thinking about systems thinking and strategy. And it comes from quite a well-known strategy author, Henry Mintzberg. And he speaks about the difference between deliberate strategy and emergent strategy. And if you look at the arrows on the top of this slide, deliberate strategy is about setting a plan in place that has underlying some strategic priorities, and to execute that plan. It's deliberate. And you either realize your strategy, you achieve what you plan to do, or you don't realize your strategy, and then you learn from that. So that's that arrow kind of turning back to go, hold on, we need to go back to the drawing board. And the bottom part of the slide is a set of little arrows, and these are multiple things that you're trying and doing all at the same time, in order to assess where there is potential leverage, what helps you get to your realized strategy. So in systems thinking, we say this is about experimenting, about seeing where there's real possibility for a system to change. So emergent strategy is trying lots of small steps and assessing whether the system is responding to some new ideas, some new seedling ideas, and trying multiple things at the same time and learning quickly. So that then leads us to the next slide, which is really about the process of emergent strategy. This is a diagram that was created by Otto Scharmer and colleagues, and is often called the U process. And it is based on the foundation that typically, this is now applying, conventional thinking, when we see a challenge or a problem, we try to solve it as quickly as possible. So we get to the most efficient way of addressing the problem. And we apply, obviously, what we know. So at the top left of the slide, we have a challenge, and top right, we get to the response as quickly as possible. So there you've got your ordinary reacting cycle of challenge response happening at the top of the slide. What the U process invites us into when a situation is complex is to understand the system first. So to step back and to uncover this existing reality, this conceptual reality that I spoke about, and really try to see why this particular system is acting in the way that it is. And that's called a purposeful detour. And by understanding the system more deeply, which includes interviewing people, going on learning journeys, bringing a group together to try to understand their different points of view. I just think back to that first picture I showed you of the two Colombians. That's what they did in the first workshop, is like, what's your reality and what's mine? And then you get to the bottom of the U with some new insights of the system. And at the bottom of the U is the place where you reorientate yourself and decide what are the little things that we're going to start experimenting with that we think might change this situation. So that's about together co-creating new ideas, innovations, and ecologies. And we're going to get into this process in a bit more of a structured way next. So the phases of a process of addressing a complex problem is, when we're stepping back and when we are zooming out. So for example, you started with your systems map. It's broken down into three parts. The phases are opening up, diverging, that's going down the left hand side of the U, and opening up to many different perspectives. You expand your systems, the boundaries of your system. You expand the playing field, and you open up and listen. It can often be quite overwhelming because the solutions are not apparent, and you're getting multiple perspectives. And that emerging phase is really the bottom of the U, where you notice what has changed in how I'm seeing this, how we're seeing this. And let's make some choices about where we think leverage exists, and let's test those ideas. And converging is further up the right hand side, where we can see these are some ideas that are having traction, and these are some that. So that introduces the social lab methodology, which is an approach of process to take a group through these steps of diverging, emerging, and converging in order to solve their shared social issue. So here's a definition. It is most useful for complex and adaptive challenges without predefined solutions that require a systems view and multi-stakeholder collaboration. So here's an important distinction. Conventional problems are often technical problems. They're clearly defined, and they can be solved with the knowledge of experts, people that know what to do. Adaptive challenges require new learning and engaging stakeholders and experimentation to make progress. Ronnie Heifetz is one of the great writers about adaptive leadership and adaptive challenges. If you're interested in learning more, his writing is very accessible, and there's lots of articles published that he's written, and books as well. So what's different about a social lab approach? Well, the social lab approach moves us from trying to fix symptoms quickly, so moving from the challenge to response quickly, to actually we need to understand what the root causes are, which is about understanding the whole elephant. We're moving from making recommendations on paper. Often we commission researchers and get an analysis and get a report and therefore define our strategy. That's typically a kind of conventional response, to developing solutions in practice, which is bringing people together and getting their perspective of their view in the system and deciding what they want to do together and learning from that. We're moving from relying on experts to involving all stakeholders in a particular system. So we're not getting people from outside in to assess and analyze and recommend. We're working with people in the system. We're moving from learning and then doing to learning by doing. We're moving from implementing a chosen solution, so what's the policy recommendation here, let's implement, to iteratively incubating, prototyping, and managing a portfolio of promising solutions. So iteration and incubation and prototype, those are design thinking concepts where we iterate, we do it over and over again, and incubate, we create a process and a space to learn from an idea before we kick it out. And prototype, we increase the risk of an idea by testing it at small scale and then increasing the size of that scale in the second and third iterations. And then finally, from a once-off project to a stable and growing platform that delivers results over the short and long term. So this is a practice, a social lab. It's not just a once-off thing. So let's get to this definition about complexity that I mentioned right at the beginning of this lesson. So this is what you look for to identify whether a problem is complex. Firstly, that no single one actor can solve the problem on their own. So when there's a situation and you need to address it, and you realize, gosh, I've got to work with another organization or another department to solve this problem, then there's one precondition that exists. Secondly, cause and effect are non-linear and far apart in space and time. So let's use the example of urban spatial planning or urban cities in South Africa. Many of them grew and were designed during the apartheid era. And so the problems of spatial planning existed from a long time ago, and they are manifesting in different ways around transport, access to jobs, living conditions, etc. Today, as an example. And then thirdly, the preconditions to look for is that, the situation is so different now that old solutions are insufficient. So those of you that work in healthcare or specifically with HIV and AIDS, and now more recently with the pandemic that we are experiencing, so back when the HIV and AIDS pandemic broke, there was no pre-existing solution to a pandemic that was affecting healthy adults most, and leaving behind children and old people. And the pandemics that we've addressed in the past didn't necessarily have that specific impact. So it needs a different kind of response. So a reminder, no single actor, cause and effect are across space and time, and all solutions are insufficient. If these exist, then we need a process, and we need a process to address complex problems. So what are the requirements of that process? So because no single actor can solve it, we need to collaborate, because the problem is not in a particular time and space and non-linear. We need to be systemic. We need to look at lots of different kinds of entry points to that system or people that work on that system, and we need to be experimental. We need to experiment with new ideas because old ones are insufficient. So let me give you a definition of each of these three in a more structured way. So social lab steps build in collaboration, first and foremost, which means that you need to convene a team that reflects the diversity of people affected by and involved in the priority themes. So this is a tricky one because there are so many people to choose from. But what you want to try and do is make sure that you get the most diverse experience of a particular system in a room. It doesn't mean that you just need leadership. It doesn't mean that you just need a certain layer or level. It doesn't mean that you're trying to get the smartest people in a room together. You are trying to intentionally bring parts of the system that have a very different experience of that particular system together, and contract with that group of people to say, we're going to figure out how to solve this problem by experimenting together. Secondly, to take a systemic approach. So the group together have to define what's our system. What is the problematic situation that we want to address? It's not for you to predefine what that system is. You might have an idea of it, but the group actually need to say, actually, this is our understanding of what the system is in the problematic situation. And then set up an intentional process to identify what it is we want to experiment with based on our understanding of the system, and rapid prototyping, testing, feedback, and iteration before piloting in the real world. Right, so the final thing that I want to leave you with in understanding the process is to recap by saying a social lab builds in a process that that ensures there's collaboration, a systemic approach, and space to experiment. That first we try to understand the system more deeply together by getting multiple perspectives and learning. We then look at what are some new learnings from that insight, identify leverage, and test and experiment. So this slide here is a story that is written up in the first person, and I'm going to stop now and ask you to read it quietly to yourself, and then I will give you the class task before we close this lesson. Okay, so for those of you that need to read it again, you can just pause the voice over here, and I invite you as your task at the end of this lesson to find one or two other classmates. You can find that through the WhatsApp group, or somebody who's you met during orientation, and set up a conversation with them and use this story as a base for applying our learning. And I'll tell you what to do. Excuse me. So some of you might recognize who this is. This is another Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Muhammad Yunus, who set up the Grameen Bank a long time ago now, over 20 years ago, because he found this systemic problem of poor people not having guarantees to loans. And please read up on him. It is an innovative story, but that's not the requirement for the class task. I just want you to use this sheet, and I invite you to discuss how Muhammad Yunus practiced a collaborative, systemic, and emergent approach. So how did he practice these ways of addressing a complex problem in the story? And then just write up your reflections on the blackboard and post it when you're ready. And I'll see you in the next lesson. Thanks, everyone.